Hello, welcome to the lecture 11. So, here we will discussing about the types of the crop models or say nature of the crop models. So, earlier classes we have discussed about the introduction to crop modeling, why should you go for crop modeling, and the decision support systems, information systems and decision making process in agricultural productions. How the essentiality the models to get information, to get data, to get knowledge, and which is helpful for the decision making process, and the decisions is communicated to the end users. It may be farmers, policy makers, decision makers, and that is used for the increasing agricultural productions, and that used for the deciding at the framing the management practices to minimize the adverse effect of any weather abnormalities or the climate change on crop productions. So, this lecture particularly will be dealing with the nature of crop model. The different type of models are there. So, what is the behavior or the nature of the crop models. So, coming to this one. So, the crop models there are different type of the models are available. We can have the different type of models are here. These are we can say empirical models or the statistical. We will discuss about each one. Say empirical model or statistical models, it may be mechanistic or the process based models, it may be deterministic or the stochastic models, static or dynamic models, descriptive or the predictive models, simulation based system models. Mainly this say 5 categories. The crop the models can be statistical model, mechanistic model, deterministic model or stochastic models, static or dynamic models, descriptive or the predictive models. So, these models will be they categories often overlap, but modern crop models combines more than one approaches for the crop modeling. So, discuss one by one. So, what is the empirical model or statistical model? So, these models based upon the observed relationship between the input and the output parameters. So, derived from the experiments or the long term observation we can say this model is a statistical model. So, example like y is equal to a plus bx plus cx square. So, there are different multiple variables are there. So, a is the parameters, b are the parameters, c are the parameters. So, in this yield is a function of the different weather based parameters. So, this is a statistical model, say empirical model based upon the particular observations. This is a particular location. Suppose we have the rainfall data for the or the temperature data, sunshine hour data, for different other parameter data for the long term data we have, and we know the yield of a particular crop based upon the yield. So, we feed the regression type model, static regression models with these other parameters. So, this does not take into account the crop management practices and the other factors, only the relationship between the yield and these other parameters. That is just a empirical equations or the model developed for a particular location. It may not fit to other locations as well for particular. So, that is your advantage, means the simple and quick, you can know you have understanding about the effect of the other parameters on the crop productions. So, that is a limited how you can do this one. Just for an example, if you so suppose you have weather parameters. So, you want to develop relationship between yield versus weather parameters. So, this empirical model, statistical model based upon long term data, you have different years, year 1, 2, 3, 4, 30 years you have the weather data. It may be suppose temperature, T max, max temperature, minimum temperature, rainfalls, you have the temperature, rainfall, radiation versus yield. For different years yield remains for particular crop, yield you have the 30 yield. So, you have the 30 yield values, you have the temperature values, 30 temperature values, rainfall values, radiation value. Based upon this we can develop a simple statistical equation y is equal to a plus b x plus c b x 1 plus c x 2. So, these are the plus. Likewise, based upon the parameters we can make relationship. This relationship particularly for a specific group of particular type of the crops and for a particular locations, for that locations for range of crops this is applicable, but this relationship may not applicable for other locations. This may not be go for different locations. So, this is a statistical relationship, very quick you can do for this relationship you can develop very quickly. This is a on limitations limited to specific regions and the conditions and poor extrapolation under climate change scenarios. This may not work if suppose temperature increases or there is some change in climatic conditions. So, this may not work well, this is only for a particular location for normal weather conditions, this may give some understanding, otherwise this may not work for the climate change scenarios. We cannot know how the rise in temperature or the rainfall or the change in radiations, how this is going to behave for a specific locations, for a specific set of temperature you can develop a statistical relationship. So, we take agroclimatic models predicting wheat yield using temperature rainfall only. For that condition we do not consider the other parameters, soil parameters, management parameters, those parameters are not taken into account, only yield relationship with the weather parameters. So, if agroecological zone yield estimation models using temperature rainfall, that is done. And the other one, the mechanistic and process based model. This is the model, most of the crop models are the process based model. That means that represent the biological and physiological process using this mathematical equation. So, mostly the process based model they are based upon some of the preconceived biological theory, like the photosynthesis, respirations, nutrient uptake, soil water balance, nutrient balance. Some biological theory are involved in the growth and the yield predictions. So, these are called mechanistic model or the process based models, not the empirical models. So, this can be applied across environments, useful for climate change and management simulations as we do. So, many of the crop models they are the mechanistic in nature or the process based model. So, they are based upon some of the biological theories based on which the model is developed. So, for that what we do we will discuss also in future classes. It needs a data intensive process. You need to provide the proper data sets, quality data sets for this particularly model parameterizations and the model calibration. This needs a proper data. Once model is ready, tested model validated, this can be applied to irrespective of the locations wherever it is. But before application for a particular locations, it need the estimations of the model parameters for that locations only and the calibrations validations for that locations. So, most of the crop models like DSAT will be dealing on all details using DSAT models. So, this they have it has cereal crops, also the pulses, oil seeds, many crops are there in DSAT models, and also upstream, post and info crop models. These are all process based model. These models are based some of the biological theory, some hypothesis. We will discuss about how the growth is simulated, how the biomass is accumulated in the plants, net assimilations, how assimilate partition to the different plant parts, above ground biomass and the root portions, and above ground biomass how it partition to the economic plant part, that we are discussing in this model as a biological theory. And the other models say as deterministic or the stochastic. Deterministic means they gives a definite predictions. Say produces the same output for a given inputs. Say there is no randomness, no probabilistic predictions. Whereas in case of stochastic, this gives a range of outputs. This is for a particularly this is uncertainty analysis, use the stochastic model. This is a probabilistic model. This gives a range of output for particular input parameters, but deterministic that gives a definite predictions for the same inputs, that gives a definite predictions of the models. And crop models are mostly deterministic, not stochastic. The stochastic models, particularly you can get now relationship the weather or the management variability with the relations we get as a stochastic model, but most of the crop models you can see the DSAT or InfoCrop or the UpSim, these are all deterministic models. They give a definite predictions or definite output for a given input, but not stochastic model, not probabilistic model, crop models. This may be static or dynamic models. The static models, dynamic models. Static models means they I discussed statistical models we discussed. Static models, they represent a system at a fixed point in time, no feedback mechanism. So, there is time is not a variable here. So, a crop climate relationship for particular temperature at a particular point of time, or if you can take the mean temperature of a summation of a particular month mean temperature, how the yield behaves. So, that is a static model. How different from dynamic models? Dynamic model that represent the system changes over time using different, because that gives a response of the output that changes through the time. In dynamic model, suppose the crop biomass changes with the time, as you know biomass today and biomass 10 days after is different, and 20 days after is different biomass. So, that changes time. So, time is a variable there, and most dynamic crop models are dynamic in nature. They give the output of the model that has a time functions. With time the output changes. This is not a static model, it is a dynamic model. Static models is a particular point of time. We can have relationship, particularly if you see the particular month of, if you take only single events, then you can develop relation single event with the crop yield, but we cannot take the time series events. In case of dynamic models, this is a time oriented, where time is a variable. Most of the crop models are dynamic natures, not static models, because DSAT, UpSim, OPCOST, InfoCrops. So, all the models they are dynamic, because see crop once you planted the crop, you have sown the crop, and you see the output, appearance of leaves, appearance of stems, appearance of flowers, appearance of fruits, appearance of the economic parts, and the biomass changes, leaf area also changes over the time. So, these are time dependent variables. So, these are dynamic models where time is a factor is there. So, most of the crop models are dynamic in nature, not static models. And the other one we can say the descriptive, predictive and simulation models. Descriptive means we say these are the qualitative explanations. So, most of the as you have discussed earlier, the developmental phases like growth and development, that is appearance of the flowers, appearance of the fruits, maturity. These are the descriptive events, the qualitative events, and the phenological charts like growth curves I discussed earlier. So, these are the days to appearance of flowering, leaf initiation, panicle initiations, flowering of the crop, grain filling, maturity. These are the qualitative events, these are descriptive models give the qualitative predictions, and the predictive models give a quantitative, particularly you can go for the as a yield or the other growth parameters, qualitative say predictive models yield as phenology based on input data, qualitative. Then if the simulation, DSAT, UpSim, CropSys, they are all simulation models. So, crop models that has a descriptive, that when you go for the crop models, that predict the biomass, as we discussed earlier. You will discuss this one how. So, as you have discussed earlier, if you see the growth and development of a crop, so if you see the time as the growth curve, these are the different growth phases. You have discussed these are different growth phases. So, developmental phases, this is the growth, time. So, the model can simulate this discrete qualitative, these are different growth phases. If you say this is the tiller, this phase is the rice panicularization, or you can say this the flowering, maturity. So, these are the phases that predicted by the model, predicted by the model, growth phases, and also the growth is a quantitative as a gram biomass per unit area. So, descriptive models and the predictive models. So, model can simulate, can predict the duration, that makes predictions of the durations. Developmental phases, and also this is the quality parameters, and the growth, or that in the terms of biomass and yield. This is the quantity. So, model the predict the developmental phases based upon the temperature, growing degree day, and the growth of course based upon the radiation interceptions, and also temperature that predict the biomass. This done by model. So, of course, we have discussed about the nature of the crop model. Crop models are mostly deterministic, they give a definite predictions of the output at any point of time. This is a time scale, hourly, every time scale that predicts the biomass. It gives a for certain input parameters that predicts or simulate the growth of the crop, that also predict the developmental phases, definite prediction of the developmental phases of the crops, that gives a definite prediction. It is a deterministic models. This is a dynamic models, dynamic in the form of the time. The time is a variable in it. So, with time that predict the growth and the development, how development like tillering stage in particular crop, suppose you have taken the example of a rice crop, how the tillering, panicularization, flowering, maturity that appear, the developmental phases. So, that gives a definite predictions of the developmental phases, time taken for appearance of tillering, panicularization, flowering, maturity, that gives a definite predictions, and with time is that is why it is known as a deterministic, it is a dynamic model, because time is a variable with time, and this is deterministic because that gives a definite predictions of the growth or the as a in the terms of biomass gram per meter square, or the yield gram per meter square, and also gives a predictions of the phenomenological events, the when the tiller will appear, when there will be appearance of panicles, when there is appearance of the flowering, when the crop will come to mature. So, that gives a definite predictions, that is say as a deterministic model. So, is a dynamic models, with time that gives the growth and the time series events, phenological events. It is a deterministic models, it gives a definite predictions, not stochastic, and also this is a mechanistic model. Mechanistic model means, so this biomass, as you told, the biomass suppose growth gram per meter square, these are based upon some of the preconceived biological theory, because biomass, this is not a linear function. With change in time, we do not get a biomass like a, as time changes, this is not the trend, this is not the linear relationship, this is not linear, this is a S-shaped growth curve. So, the response of now the growth with the time, that differs with different growth stages of the crop. From up to tillering, this is a slow growth, then goes for the rapid growth, then growth is there but at decreasing rate, is a constant growth, then there is a decline in growth. So, these are not the response, the growth with the time, the relationship is not constant, that changes over the time, and this is based upon the some of the biological theory. That is what this is a mechanistic model, and this is not an empirical model, not based on understanding or observations. There are some biological theories involved. The crop grows for photosynthesis, goes for the respirations, and the photosynthesis, respirations, that depends upon the progress of the crops. The crop up to certain point there is a growth increases at increasing rate, then there is a appearance of the reproductive phase panicles, then the growth splitted. So, there is a appearance of, as you discussed, there is a growth splitted. When you have the biomass, then there is a panicle formation starts, growth splitted, and the carbohydrates, they are accumulated in the canopy parts, they get transferred to the panicle parts. Then there is a maturity, grain maturity, the growth remains almost constant, but there is a maturing of the grain filling starts, then there is a the crop attains the maturity, there is a drop in it. So, the point is what we are saying here, this biomass, the growth of the crop, the photosynthesis, that is based upon the some of the biological theory. There is a growth assimilation, growth accumulations, and the carbohydrates assimilated by the crop, that is converted to tissue formations, and that leads to tissue building and the biomass of the crop, and the response is different, the different growth stage. That means time, as the crop progresses time, this response of the biomass accumulations, the time that differs, and this is because as a mechanistic model, this is not an empirical model. So, the point is the crop models are the dynamic in nature, deterministic natures, and also mechanistic in nature. These are the nature of the crop model. Then I can explain you why we are going for the crop modeling and the simulation just briefly. If you suppose, we will also discuss the next classes, just next class we have the type of the experiment required to develop the for the crop models operations and simulations. Why to go for crop modeling? So, earlier we have discussed the need of the crop modeling, that what it does, that reduces our the time. We can have a better understanding in the limited time. If you use crop models, we can, that enhances our understanding with limited time and limited expenses as well. So, what is suppose in case of the, if you want to for example, if you want to know the effect of a particular parameters, the crop, because the crop system is a very complex, it needs the management of several input factors like irrigation management, nutrient management, weather management, and of course, you have the planting seed, other cultural operations. So to understand the effect of all the parameters in a single experiment, it's next to impossible. We cannot do that one. In a single experiment, we cannot understand the effect of all the parameters. We need multiple experiments to understand the effect of this inputs on the growth of the crop. And in one experiment, you can use the 2 factors or at best 3 factors. maximum 3 factors means you have the suppose irrigation one factor, nutrient is one factor, weather is one factors, other management practices another factors. So, all the factors cannot be tested in one experiment. You can at best you can test suppose factors, how many factors you can test? You can test limited factors only, limited factors through experiment only limited factors can be tested, you cannot test for several factors like irrigation is a factor, fertilizer is a factor, weather is a factor and other input management, other management like planting. So, different factors. So, you cannot test all factors in one experiment and labels also. Suppose you take one factors fertilizer, different labels, how many labels you can test in the experiment? You can have only you can have the 3 to 4 to 5 labels you can test, either the fertilizer, no fertilizer applications 20 kg per hectare, 30 kg, 40 kg, 50 kg, 60 kg, only limited label can be tested, you cannot test so many labels. So, the experiment has that limitations, only few factors you can test and labels also limited labels you can test, either 4, 5 or 6 labels. So, in that case the model does a complement to the experiment, where if the model is tested you can test so many factors at a time, you can test irrigation, you can test fertilizers, you can test weather parameters and any labels for a particular factor. Suppose take fertilizers, you can test several labels starting from 0 kg, 10 kg, 20 kg, 25, 30, 40, 50, any labels you can test. So, this is the beauty of the models over experiment, because here you can as many factors can be tried, as many labels can be tried. Also the like experiment you can try only one locations, 2 locations, 3 locations, maximum 5 locations you can manage, but simulations is n number of locations, as many as locations you can manage. So, this has a beauty of the models over the field experiments, where the it is a complement. I can also discuss it is a complement to the experiment, and where the experimental understanding can be improved having the model. So, they are all they both complement each other definitely. So, in a summary you can have that the crop models differ in complexity, data requirement and the purposes definitely. Crop models are the mechanistic models you can say. So, they are based upon the some biological theory, and they are the deterministic models, give the definite predictions of the output, and they are dynamic models, simulate time dependent process. So, these are the nature and type of the crop models. With this I thank you all.